Next up is BIM for All, the state of BIM in the U.S. and the world. Sponsored by the Academic Committee. Building Information Modeling, or BIM, provides an opportunity to change business practices that have often resulted in facilities being delivered too slowly, with too much risk, at too much cost, and without meeting customer expectations. With the new release of standards this fall, the coordinated implementation of BIM requires a coordinated academic approach. Here to tell us about it is Deke Smith, Executive Director of Building Smart Alliances at the National Institute of Building Sciences. Please welcome Deke Smith.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for having me this year. I guess since I'm the first person that seems to have uttered the word BIM, it might be important for me to first give you a definition of that. And basically, the National BIM Standard, version 2, came out with that standard, and it says, a building information model is a digital representation of physical and functional characteristics of a facility. As such, it serves as a shared knowledge resource for information about a facility, forming a reliable basis for decisions during its life cycle from inception onward. What we're talking here is having a situation where we've got a whole life cycle of information. We go out and collect information one time. We use that information to actually build the building electronically and then go out and build it physically. It probably has a really unfortunate name because I think as you'll see through this presentation, we're really expanding that. And I don't care whether we call it virtual design and construction or it encompasses lean. It encompasses probably a lot of the things that we've already talked about this morning that probably haven't really even been incorporated or brought into it. But what we want to talk about today is the fact that we've really only scratched the surface of BIM. And we really have a lot more to take advantage of. A lot more opportunity exists. Also, instead of just the traditional looking at it as being vertical construction, BIM is also now being used in horizontal construction, and it's also being used as an interface to tie between different types of construction efforts, to include geospatial. We'll talk about that. Also, I mentioned the life cycle. I think that's one of the biggest aspects and probably the most important part that we have to really change in our industry. Also, we'll look at how the United States, quite frankly, is starting to fall behind in this. And I think that it's something that we really need to take a challenge and move forward with. So I also encourage you to come and look at and visit the implementation sessions later, right over behind the wall here in Grand Ballroom 9 and 10. And that'll be at 11:30 and at 1:30. We'll get into a lot more of the details of what I'm going to talk about here. So BIM for all, as I mentioned, horizontal and vertical. Are we sustainable? We talk a lot about sustainability, but I think that's one of the things that it's pretty much lip service at this point. Where does the United States stand today in this issue? And we're talking about a worldwide effort that is, certainly all the European Union, but also China, Asia, and a lot of all the countries in between, quite frankly. So this was one of the aha moments for me, listening to a presentation that Frank Gehry gave when he was getting an award. And what happened was he was talking about the risk that he had when he designed this different facilities. The point that structural engineers thought it was too much risk to actually do the structural design. Structural fabricators thought there was too much risk to do the fabrication. So what he did was created Gehry Technologies. And Gehry Technologies then went ahead and built the building electronically, as I mentioned, and then sent from the model, went to fabrication, plasma cut the steel, and delivered the steel on that project with no change orders. So here you go from a situation where it was too much risk for people to even attempt to a situation where you have zero change orders. And what we're talking about here is creating an information pipeline. taking information that we create during early stages and moving through design, construction, operations, and sustainment. What we want to look at is the information going through GIS, through surveys, shop drawings, engineering analysis, simulation, code checking, product purchasing, fabrication, invoicing, clash detection, scheduling, lifecycle costing, IWIMS, operations, first responders, and ultimately getting into supporting demolition. As I mentioned, it's above ground and below ground, horizontal and vertical. There's really no area that information is not important today in our business. And we have to move to the information age. The UK Crossrail project was a good example, an early example of where we're looking at this as tying these different capabilities together, where they're looking at above ground and underground. Another example, and actually these diagrams, interestingly enough, come from a company in India, and they've integrated now BIM with infrastructure management models. And that's, I think, also important that we're looking at. We talked about infrastructure earlier today. Infrastructure is becoming, obviously, a huge issue in our industry, and this is where all these things start coming together. We're working with Fiatech, who's working on a standard called 15926, which is also called ISO 15926, Real-Time Interoperability Network Grid. And that's what IRING stands for. And there's other ISO committees that are working on developing standards in GIS and in BIM and in other areas. And what we need to do is tie all these things together. Airport design is another example. Huge infrastructure issues related to it, above ground, underground. And we want to be able to tie those together too. Rail and Metro. We just recently, we have a conference in January, and at the end of that conference, we had the opportunity, there was a Transportation Research Board was meeting in the same facility. So we had a joint meeting between our effort, Building Smart Alliance, and the Transportation Research Board. And what we found was that there were a lot of crossovers, a lot of shared capabilities, especially as we got into digital project delivery. And this is certainly another aspect of all of this. Oops, that one went a little fast. Okay, so I mentioned we talk about sustainability, but very often, and pretty much everything I've heard so far, we're talking about first cost. First cost is a nice metric, but it doesn't really address the sustainability issue. We really have to move towards an overall total cost of operations view. We're looking at acquisition and commissioning, operations, maintenance, production, and disposal. What are all the costs that go into a facility throughout its life? This is where we stand in the world today. This is a chart from a smart building report from McGraw-Hill. And as you can see, the United States is kind of a little bit towards the bottom there. What's interesting is that Republic of South Korea and the UK are below us. They now have plans on how to improve their infrastructure and their implementation of BIM. The example in the UK, they have a goal of implementing BIM by 2016. They have a person that's in Parliament, Francis Maude, who has identified this as a major goal to change the way they do procurement and to meet their carbon footprint goals. And they have a team that's working, they're looking at how do they reduce the costs so they can build more facilities. How can they build like 60 schools with the savings that they're getting out of improving the way they produce? So I'm giving us a challenge. And that challenge is to go out and find a leader. And this is really a challenge, I want to tell you. because there is no Francis Maude in our Congress. There is no one person right now who has an orientation towards trying to improve and profoundly change business process re-engineering type situation, profoundly change the way we do business. So we need to find a leader, and we need to go out and start making these changes, start moving our country and our orientation towards building information modeling. And I thank you very much.